Well, ladies and gentlemen, we come to our final curve of macroeconomics. This one is called the foreign exchange market. Notice in this particular curve, I've actually drawn up two curves. I've drawn up one that is for the United States and one is for Mexico. Also, notice that what we're talking about here looks is going to be currency because that's what we're talking about, currency exchange. And there's going to be a lot of reasons why, and we'll get to those in a minute, why currency is exchanged. But when it is exchanged, understand that two words play a part. When they are exchanged, appreciation and depreciation occur. Understand that when appreciation occurs on one side, then depreciation occurs on the other side. If we're looking at two particular countries, in other words, if appreciation happens, this means depreciation is happening somewhere else. So the key is that not so much that we worry so much about appreciation, because appreciation of a currency is not something we want all the time, because once again, appreciation is not always an indication of a great economy, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But let's talk about the actual curve. I've already drawn up a lot of points here, A, B, and C. So when I say point B, I want us to notice that there is appreciation occurring whenever we get to point B. And notice point C, there is depreciation occurring. And we're talking about in the United States. Over here, notice that in Mexico, that at point B, depreciation is occurring, and at point C, appreciation is occurring. So I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the curve itself. Notice that there is a demand curve, okay, on both sides. Notice too that the demand for dollar bills is going to be demanded by Mexico. Who's supplying them? The United States. Over here, the opposite. Mexico is supplying their own currency, and over here, the United States is demanding that particular currency. All right. Notice too up here we have exchange rates. Over here, we have the Mexican peso over the United States dollar. What we're looking at is how many Mexican pesos does it take to make up $1? Over here on the Mexican side, you have how many US dollars does it take to make a peso? Okay. We're going to start here at 1 to 1 on both sides, okay? Just for the purpose of having a starting point that's fair. So at this point in time, it takes one Mexican peso to equal one USA dollar. The same would be on the opposite. So we'll start that on point A. That's where we will start right here. That's our exchange rate. There's no appreciation, there's no depreciation occurring. That will occur as we make our moves, okay? There are actually going to be four shifters, okay, of our demand curve. But what I want you to note is that if you'll notice that when when demand shifts on the USA, understand that supply shifted over here to get to this point B. So what I'm wanting you to understand is that if we shift demand on one side, we shift supply on the other country. I'll explain that a little more as we move along. Just understand that if demand shifts over here, supply shifts over here in the same direction. And that's where we get our appreciation and depreciation. And it doesn't matter which curve you switch. If you wanted to shift demand over here and you wanted to shift supply over here, it doesn't matter on the test. You can do either one as long as you show appreciation or depreciation of the currency. It doesn't matter. Okay. So let's look at the four shifters, and the first one is called tastes and preferences. Basically, what we're talking about here is that for some reason people are wanting to come to your country. Let's give an example of, let's say the United States got the World Cup. Well, if the United States got the World Cup, then essentially people in Mexico are going to want to come to the World Cup. But in order to come to the World Cup, they're going to have USA dollars. So they're going to supply more of their Mexican peso, and they're going to convert it to the United States dollar. And so what we will see is an increase or shift to the right in demand for USA dollars and a shift to the right in the supply of Mexican pesos as they begin to want to go to the World Cup. Okay, in this particular case, what we will see is some appreciation of the United States currency due to the increased amount of demand for the United States dollar. And we will see some depreciation in the Mexican peso due to the increase in supply of the peso as they're pulling out all their money to convert to United States dollars. So in this particular case, B the would be the response to, say, the World Cup coming to the United States. And that could be for anything, anytime there is some type of interest. You know, if the United States was going to Russia for the World Cup, well, the United States dollar would depreciate because they're going to convert all of their U.S. dollars into the Russian currency, and essentially the Russian currency's demand would shift to the right. They would be at point B and see some appreciation. So that's what tastes and preferences is. The next one is interest rates. The key thing with interest rates is that we have to separate interest rates from what we did with investment. Remember, we said that investors love the low interest rates. They want to borrow money whenever interest rates are low. Remember the saying, when interest rates are high, investors say goodbye. When interest rates are low, investors say hello. But that is just not true in the currency market because of what they're buying into. Let's look at this. Let's say, for example, over here, let's say the United States currency, its interest rates were at 14%. Let's say over here that the Mexican currency is sitting at 7%. You are a currency investor, okay? The way you invest in another country's currency is you buy bonds. Which of these bonds would you want? Obviously, you're going to want the 14% because it has a larger payback. So, higher interest rates means more demand. So, as you have the higher interest rates, your demand would again shift to the right. And again, over here, you would see Mexican currency investors put out their money in order again to buy into the United States currency. So investors would come to the United States, and then of course you would see that the demand would shift over here for the United States to point B, and the supply would shift to the right over here for point B under the Mexican economy, just due to the higher interest rates. So again, point B would be a good example of how demand can be shifted. Again, if the United States had low interest rates, demand would shift to the left to point C, and our currency would depreciate. And as if the Mexican economy had higher interest rates, we would pour our money into the peso. And so we would supply, and our supply would shift to the right, and our currency would depreciate. Okay? Let's move on to the next one, inflation. Higher prices are not always a good thing, okay? Sometimes they can indicate a very fast-moving economy. As you've already learned in your aggregate model, an inflationary gap can be dangerous, but it can also indicate some good things. But let's just look at it, all right? If inflation occurs, this means that the price of your products in your country are more expensive. Let's say the United States and Mexico both produce avocados, and let's say the price per avocado is 25% for Mexico, and because of inflation in the United States, it's about 35 cents. Which one would you want to buy from, Mexico or the United States? Well, obviously, you're going to buy from Mexico. Other countries will trade with Mexico. The United States will even look to trade with Mexico. In doing so, what's going to happen because of the high prices in the United States, essentially um, the demand for our currency is going to shift to the left to point C. So we will shift to the left, and of course, for Mexico, they will shift their supply of currency to the left, appreciating their currency and our currency depreciating it. Remember, you could have done it the other way. You could have gone in and said, okay, the demand for Mexican currency shifts up because people want to convert their money to the Mexican currency, and then of course it'll shift to the right, and then the supply of our currency would shift to the right. Either way, it depreciates the currency, and on the test you could have said either one. The main thing understanding that if the demand curve shifts on one side to the right, the supply curve shifts to the right on the other curve. Does not even matter which way you look at it. So, a good example would be inflation depreciating a currency at point C. Then we get to income. And income is another example of how we can basically an economy or a currency can depreciate. And in this particular case, let's say income goes up. Well, in the economy, that's a good deal. Okay, that's why depreciation of a currency is not always that bad. Okay, an economy could be doing very well, but the currency could be depreciating. So we don't want to look at it as just because we have a depreciating currency doesn't mean we have a bad economy. All right. In this particular case, income has gone up. So when income has gone up, essentially people have more money. Therefore, you could see essentially that on the United States side, let's say here in Mexico, for example, the income went up, their supply of money shifted to the right. And essentially, if they shifted to the right, that would appreciate our United States currency and it would depreciate their currency. And the same thing could happen over here. Supply could shift to the right here, and in doing that, we would depreciate our currency and appreciate this currency. So higher income tends to depreciate a currency because of increased supply, and on the other side, it would increase demand for the other currency. So there you go. And remember, you can do it any way you want. Just make sure that you show it. So these are the four shifters of the demand curve, and just remember that you have to be able to explain it either way. For example, tastes and preferences. You could have gone with shifting a demand curve to the left over here for Mexico, and shifting the supply curve to the left over here. It doesn't matter how you do it, just as long as you're able to explain it. The demand for Mexico's currency shifts to the left because people are now demanding the United States currency. So the demand over here shifts to the left, and the supply over here shifts to the right. Shifts to the left. So that's it. That is the foreign exchange market. We will then tomorrow we'll talk about a little bit more about trade, but hopefully you've got this. If you have any questions, again, please write them down, and let's go over them in our conference this week. Look forward to it. Thank you. Bye.